I've got some tape and I could do like a little makeshift sign. But I could tape the agenda to the window or something.
Yeah, there are two solar.
Hi.
The one's on
Hi.
the local solar plan
Welcome.
and the PV partners.
You might be on the
specific
phone.
or related.
Dina
And the
said
second
something.
item is on the net energy
I think I read
metering.
that somewhere.
Did you guys get the letter?
Maybe.
We got the only two copies of
So
it.
you guys would address
I'll
that?
share this. What
So
does
the
it say?
guidance that I got from Val was, certainly
Yeah, I
prepared
thought
to
that
discuss
these
it.
were all things that I had
And
long
certainly
since
aspects of
read.
it addressed in the,
Okay.
in the presentation.
No, because we haven't seen
Except
it
the
there.
cover memo.
We didn't see the
So what
cover
time
memo.
does this guy start?
I think this starts at 6.
Okay.
It
And
does.
And then
those-
there's also.
I know, I've got road crossing services. What time is the net meeting will start?
But they
Well,
resurrected the
there might be
CMR
an agenda reshuffle, in which case.
Well, they changed
establishing
changed
Right now,
us.
the net metering
Oh,
is
really?
scheduled for
Yeah, that's
the second
attachment
of the
E.
two solar. So it might not be until, I'm not sure, it
Okay,
might be
well,
the
that's
third
what
or
the
fourth
table
item.
Well,
of
this is,
contents
this
is.
is actually probably worth, here, it's here.
I don't know the details.
2009.
Yeah.
2009, so 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15.
Did you get the text?
So this one's not.
Yeah.
Good thing that.
They moved on to some
Suzanne.
Thanks. Hey, Lala, good luck.
Yeah, thank you. See you later.
And if not for the problems and delays at Mitchell Park, we would have been
5
in a
years.
position to be decommissioned
That's for the road.
Yeah.
a year and a half,
Next door.
Does it
maybe
say
2
we're
years.
covering here? Here.
Well,
There,
this
page
is,
3, what, read page 3.
this is the kind of
Have you read page 3 already?
simple but complex action that legislative
read page
bodies
3.
find it difficult to do.
Read page 3.
Because they want to pull apart the parts
There.
and pick, and delay.
No. There must be. Yeah, that's right, this is all, this is exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, hello.
And here's the definition of the, it's 1.5 instead of 1.8.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't read that.
So the
So we'll
bottom
pull it.
line net
I just told him, say, we noticed something.
should be displeased or whatever
Right.
is
I know.
2.8, right?
2.5.
And I feel like.
2.5. Page 2,
I mean, that was
last
ridiculous.
page.
Yeah.
It kind of reflects, I think.
Or, yeah,
It just
1.5.
pushes everybody to go super fast.
Yeah, and it's
4.53
really.
in excess
Right.
bond.
Yeah, it depends if they do 1.5.
Sufficient are available to
Well, there's
return.
certainly something I like Richard.
So that takes us to 2.5.
Yeah, but look at this here.
2.501.
Do this, so he's
Yeah,
behind
because
it.
has, like, he
He's
knows,
behind
like, he has
time.
experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think what it is you guys may have to
Mm-hmm.
take a number of your banks fees. They may let that payment caps. But they're already bad.
That's up to them.
Yeah.
But why, I don't understand this, I mean, it's reverse.
But it's like,
They should advise them on
this
which
is not
opportunities
fair.
where they say that they
Just
have
wait for
property.
conflict of interest.
Yeah, they should be checking with you guys. Should we do?
Yeah.
Well, they've identified two
So-
options
right.
and they're going to consult
Right.
bond counsel on which one would be better.
No.
Let's talk about strategy.
Yes, the finance would make a decision, so city council about what to do. Bond saying can be either A or B. The decision is taken by the city council, not by, and once that's done, then they're going to say how best to do it.
Hi, Brad.
Hi.
Hi, thank you both for
You're gonna take it off the agenda today. I don't wanna
You
know
can
that.
read the sad look on my face. Yeah, we're gonna request that they continue it.
Why?
Um,
Because of this paragraph right here?
No, but it's related to that. As we were doing some last checking on the budget amendment ordinance from the past that had to do with that figure, there's a couple of things we're not sure about,
Right.
both for that number and the way we treated it in the report.
Okay,
So
so,
I'm very sorry, actually, it's my mistake.
well, so this report is not the
Excuse me.
report.
Hey, Lalo,
You're withdrawing the report.
you know what I was thinking?
We're gonna request it.
If you'd like, I know how you like to have your
I'll just
original
back.
signature on
I live
documents.
across the street, I'll go back.
I could, scan your
Oh, and
signature
you're
in and
okay,
put it
say
into
about the
DocuSign if you'd like, it's really easy.
You know, it's okay, cause
Well-
the mayor can read it.
Just,
Okay.
So,
so-
it's- yeah,
Okay,
for
just
the-
as an
So,
idea,
thank you,
I
though.
thought-
Yeah.
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 Really
So-
like it?
No,
My
but-
signature's in DocuSign.
Your
Yeah.
decommissioning in the
So-
Form 700.
the-
So
she
remember
doesn't- 'cause
how
my signature's
we
this.
had said we want everything done by
She
the
didn't know
end
who it was,
of
so she said,
2015, so you don't have to do
spell out my
another
name
Form
underneath.
700.
but you have to do it anyway because the term
The
is.
good thing
nobody
is
can
though,
tell who that is.
it
Well,
it
something
says
printed
Lalo
on.
Perez
When you
with the computer print with
decommission any
DocuSign,
commission,
so,
So
a
if it does
last
that, then we could
final
do it.
Form
Yeah.
700
Yeah, I was just concerned that it wouldn't be
must done.
consistent with-
However,
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, so it does say
Done
Lalo
in-
Perez in there,
It
and
can
print,
be the
right,
same
Let's work on
filing
it.
Yeah,
as
yeah.
an annual.
Thank you.
No problem.
So basically what that means is you
Okay.
are going to have to do one more regardless
Regardless of when it is.
of when you, of whether you're decommissioned in December or January, February.
And one the month of June.
Make sure we get it right before.
Not that that matters.
Yeah, that was, the only issue is with the council reorganization. You don't have a lot of meetings, but it'll be, so we're asking to bring this back on the 15th
Okay, I won't be here, but that's,
of December.
of December.
Yeah, to finance committee, and then it'll go to council.
Eric.
and-
I mean, Greg, and
So,
Yes.
when the transfer from the infrastructure reserve occurred, there was, a lot of cost sharing that happened between the library bond money and the arts center, because they did the connectivity.
Yeah,
Mhm.
right.
And we wanna make sure we're crystal clear on
Separating which
correct.
Of course. We'd agree with that.
Right, and so it's pulling out those figures has been a little bit more complicated.
That's all right, we're gonna leave, so you'll have
I
seats.
went
pretty
down
soon.
there to check the lock on it.
Good.
Yeah.
Do you guys have a presentation? Is everyone have a presentation?
the agenda, they may be moving item 4 up to number 1.
Right, so do they have a presentation?
I live.
They were gonna ask for it to be different to, the 15th, so it should be a quick item.
Okay, so there's no presentation, okay. You wanna plug yours in? I don't have a plug yours.
Oh, you don't, no.
Plug yours in.
I'll send everybody emailed up to it.
There's a
Really
water,
solid
there's a
job.
water utility.
Is it the utility bills that are going on the other end?
Richard, you know?
What else is on the agenda tonight?
Well, we're not.
Oh, no, so, we'll be quick, there's no presentation, no presentation.
It's over there.
You just
Yeah.
plug it in.
PNS, they're doing the water, I think it's the one on groundwater. Brad, so what are they doing at PNS related to groundwater? Over there?
It's basement dewatering.
Oh, what happened?
Basement water.
This is about.
Oh, Albert's in here, so here's.
For in order to dig new big houses. Oh, I don't get
Because, we want to make sure that, so when we did a.
What's your name? I'm Alice. Hi.
Some of the money came from the arts center. Some of the money came from.
Should we use this one? Should we make it in this
Oh,
one?
I
Is
thought,
that-
I don't have, I don't
I could've gone out.
We want to make sure that
I have
any
the
money
one
that
that
we're
looks
receiving,
like
we want to make sure that
But it's
basically,
okay.
when I tested it before, it did.
Okay.
is the right number, and that we're not repaying the infrastructure.
Sorry.
That's all fine.
Okay.
Suzanne,
Old
where's
Rock
Ed?
building. Ed was at a conference, meeting in DC, and he's on his way back. He will be here tomorrow afternoon by 2. He's approving council letters as I see them going one by one. Ed has just approved this and that, so he's probably being more productive than I am. What? I did 5 last night, but I was like, is that gonna be back with
What's the conference on?
You know what? I do not know. It's a committee he's been on for many years.
Oh, cool. For some organization?
You know, I just remember him writing Jim a note and copying me and saying, you know, this is a committee I've worked on for many years at the national or international. He probably
No, it's quite all right. Don't worry. It's more making conversation. I'm
I
just
just
curious.
remember him saying he's working in the committee.
No, I just needed to ask him if he was going to the NCPA meeting or not. That's right.
Is that tomorrow?
No, it's next week. So I just wasn't sure
Oh, you know,
where he was and what he was doing.
Tomorrow, if you're available to meet with.
That was
I am.
never
I am. You got a date? A time?
Well,
they were. They ran that I think whoever had the ball was going to win the game.
That base has really helped us on
Set to start again, huh?
what's that?
We've already started once, so we're gonna start again.
Start again.
I have just lost one. Were you there?
I was on, I watched it.
Yeah, I watched it.
Is this it?
I'll have to
No.
say, watching this TV is
Liz?
so good.
Liz? Is this it?
So many angles.
No, I took it out. I didn't put it there for the box. Yeah, CAO.
Okay, yeah, they're
Yeah, 2 o'clock. This is so much better.
the TV. You get the
You
best
get the
angle.
replays and they show you exactly, I mean, they went through that. It was unclear to me why they gave them the touchdown. Because his knee was down before the ball was over. This was the second touchdown.
I do agree with you, but it actually, I think, helped us in the end because if they had run another play or two
They might have-
and gotten it in, we would have had less time.
Yeah, okay.
So by them scoring with 30 seconds to go.
Oh, okay, well, that's interesting, yeah.
No,
Boy, are they fast. They're really fast. What about Oregon? They played without pads. Did you realize that? They didn't play with any pads on their legs.
Yeah, with no leg.
No leg pads. They run like the wind. I mean, they are really fast. We look like sluggers. Really, seriously.
People are getting dinner. So
Meeting before, yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, but you're there.
well, Suzanne is going to tell us to go home early.
I'm sorry.
Well, you
Liz
guys,
will.
well, you guys were here late too, so.
Yeah, it was the
Yeah, if I
latest
start
meeting.
snoozing.
It's 10 to 1
Good
meeting.
job. I think what-
Yeah, what time was 10 to 1? Because I got home at like 1:30.
a little bit over 2 a.m.
After 2,
There was a budget adoption.
with some controversy.
Utility reps.
Oh, I was about to. My son has seizures.
What they would use is
So although actually there's no one here from the library.
Monique was gonna come, but she might have gotten word that, we do have one commission.
Well,
Now, they want to finish by end of December.
Yeah.
So do they have to go to the council and make a report?
It still has to go to council, yeah. So I think, because they have to file Form 700, so that they can do one form to finish
Oh, they
the
can.
term and the 16th year, so they can go down. So that'd be great.
Tricky.
They don't want to go for more.
Yeah. How much detail did they go into? Did you ever sit through any of their meetings?
Joe and for me, but, you know, Rob understands the question comes in all ways.
Yeah.
So they're pretty good about
It was
it's taken some time to, it's been a long, longer than anticipated.
It's a little too bad they weren't here tonight, because last night we gave out the 5-year architectural awards, and 2 of the 5 winners were the 2 libraries. So it would have been a nice night to.
Seascale was another one, right?
Yeah, sustainability they won for.
That's pretty good. That's a big number for
Yeah, yeah. I guess the Apple Store, and there was one other private building. But yeah, it's a good group.
Yeah.
He's right there. I just saw him outside talking about.
He's outside the door.
Okay.
Right?
That's right.
We just lost our 15 minutes. Okay, if I could call the meeting of the Finance Committee to order. Clerk, do you want to call the roll?
Councilmember Vilsack? Councilmember Niss? Here. Councilmember Sharp?
Here.
Vice Mayor and Chair Schmidt?
Here.
4 present.
Thank you. I guess our first order of business is oral communications. If there's anyone from the public who wants to speak, speak now.
Or forever hold your peace. Got it.
Not forever. I guess the agenda is probably the next item, and there is a suggestion from the staff that we postpone item number 4 through next week. Lalo, do you want to?
Yes, Brad, why don't you go ahead and... Sure. Good evening, Chair Schmidt and committee members. As we were doing the final preparations for the report this evening, we noticed some potential inaccuracies. Excuse me. We noticed some potential inaccuracies in the Library Bond Oversight Committee report and in the infrastructure reserve figure that's in recommendation 2 in the staff report. If possible, we'd like to continue this item to make sure we can ensure the report is correct before bringing it to you.
So,
Absolutely, yeah. I guess we would have caught that, of course.
so is it really that complicated that, I mean, that you couldn't just tell us what the difference is and we couldn't just get through it fairly quickly? I mean, it doesn't strike me as a complicated matter. That's all.
I think I heard the staff ask to bring it back next week.
It did. I'm just asking why.
It's a valid question. So in one aspect, we think it's just a difference between a number from a budget amendment ordinance that funded one of the projects. But we need to look back in the details of the Library Bond Oversight Committee report to verify how that number was treated. Okay. So in a sense, it's one thing, but there's 2 different ways that we need to look into it.
Okay, fair enough.
Okay, if there's no protests with that, do we need to vote? All in favor of postponing item 4?
I'll move such.
Second? All in favor? Aye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. So that brings us then to item number 1.
Valerie Fung and her staff are coming up. 15.
Well, miss that calendar up.
Good evening. Good to see you.
Thank you, Chair Schmidt, members of the Finance Committee. I'm Valerie Fong, Utilities Director. I have with me Utilities Business Strategic Manager, Dave Yen. We don't have a presentation, but we're happy to answer any questions you might have.
Okay, we are focused on item number 1, right?
Correct.
And the goal of item number 1 is to, it says the Finance Committee will recommend this to the council. So that's where we're.
Just to give you a little more background, the prior Finance Committee over last year's, when the report was presented to that body, requested that staff come back in about a year and provide an update. So that's why Val and her team and myself are here to do that.
Good, thank you. Committee members, you've had a chance to look at the data. Any questions or comments?
You're going to switch us from the last meeting to this meeting.
I guess thanks for the question. And this is mine. A lot of this stuff, workforce development, project management, work management kind of stuff and so forth. It seems like UAC kind of stuff and not finance committee stuff. So are there financial implications here we ought to be reading into this? I mean, not that you shouldn't bring it here, but
Yeah.
make sure we're looking for it.
I think typically a lot of these audits were going through the Finance Committee in the past. Also, I would pose to you this really isn't a UAC issue because a lot of these are operational issues, and normally the UAC is about policy, long-term policy implications of things that we're doing as opposed to the operational matters.
Maybe it'll help if I provide a little more background as well. We tend to forget that some of you were not on the council. When we had the downturn in the general fund, we made significant reductions in staffing and expenditures in the general fund, and the council felt that we needed to do some similar type of review with the utilities. And so the city manager, James Keenan, and myself said, well, we don't believe that we should make those decisions at our level without an expert coming in and helping us make those assessments, given the nature of the business. And so that's when this firm was hired and made those recommendations. For the most part, it was deemed as a well-run organization with a few of the items here. And so that's why it stayed at finance, because it was related to the budget.
Greg?
All right, so that's what I was going to say. So I think on the high level, they came in and said, you're doing a great job, right? I mean, and they basically have the first 5 levels, highest 5 indicators that you're performing well. I agree with all of those. And then it says the main areas you're working towards best practices are information and technology, operating maintenance, capital planning, business processes. And so they're saying you're already doing stuff and you're on the right path on that. That's how I read that. If I'm saying something incorrect, jump in. And then it said the 3 areas where you're not doing best practices are workforce development, project management, and work management. And I guess on workforce development, I thought this was written in a way that I didn't really understand it. So they say you're not up to doing best practices, but they don't really say what those best practices are that you're not doing. I mean, yeah, everyone's having retirement, but that would be everybody. So I'm not sure how that was specific to us. So, and then they talk about how you've rotated employees, which is a really positive thing, cross-trained everyone. So obviously that's a best practice. So I was unclear as to what the best practices are. It's because CPA is not meeting best practice performance levels in workforce development. So what is that?
I think, Dave Young. So I think when they came back in 2014, we didn't really have a succession plan in place. So one of the best practices was to have one put together and put these rotation programs.
Now, is that a succession plan for who? Every employee? For Val? For
all of the critical positions.
For all the critical positions.
For 5 years, looking forward.
And do we have that now, or are we working on it?
We have one, but we're in the process of updating it right now as well.
Okay. Was that the only thing?
It's a major thing.
That was the main part for the workforce development, I think. I could double check.
Okay. So if that was in place, workforce development would not be on here?
Correct.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. And then project management, and work management seemed to be related in that the criticism seemed to be you didn't have an enterprise work management system. And that seemed to be the criticism.
Correct.
Okay, so if you had an enterprise work management system was working, neither of those would have been on there.
Yes.
That's how I read it.
Right.
Okay. So do you agree about needing an enterprise work management system? Are we getting one, or what's the thought?
I think currently it's on hold because of the whole ERP evaluation. Right now, we're kind of trying to use SAP, but it's very expensive to upgrade or to add to another piece of software to integrate back into it. We tried to look into another solution. It just wasn't cost effective. So I think both project management and work management are on hold until this ERP and the new billing system are in place.
I think the thing that we ended up focusing on is more project management training for our project managers. We think that they did need that. We hadn't paid attention to it for a little while. And that's been probably the best thing that we've started to do on our CIPs, on our capital improvement projects. So we did put in place what made economic and efficient sense to do. Clearly, if we're looking at replacing the SAP system, building something around the existing system doesn't make a whole lot of sense because it takes time, it deflects from current activities, and it takes a fair amount of monetary resources. So we aren't doing that, but we are doing these other training sessions to help our project managers be better project managers.
But long term, once we make the decision of whether or not to stay with SAP or not, then would we end up using an enterprise work management system module from SAP, or would we try and do something different? We don't know yet.
We don't know yet. It'll probably be some sort of automation of some sort. Right now, it's a lot of hands-off, a lot of different systems, a lot of calling back and forth. There's a lot of manual labor and intensive.
So the last time I talked about this with you was several years ago in the SAP. And what I recall is that you said that SAP does not work well. There wasn't a good module for utilities. And since the rest of the organization uses it, it's sort of tough to integrate. That was my vague recollection of that issue.
Mm-hmm.
But it's now been several years later, and I was wondering if SAP does have a better module.
Councilmember Scharf, Suzanne Mason, Assistant City Manager. We are, as a group, with the City Manager's Office and department heads, looking at how we're managing work management in the city right now. We are also looking at the ERP options for the future, and they're on parallel courses. We're looking at how all the different departments are managing work that comes in from various sources. So SAP is one area, and it has, limitations, especially in the current version we're using. But we're also looking at different areas, our tree management program, the urban forestry program, and how citywide we are managing the work, what's coming in from PA 311 from the public, and how that gets transferred out to the field. So that is a committee we've seated internally to evaluate that. And then on a parallel course, we're looking at the ERP replacement and whether that will be a standalone separate system, whether there are better systems for different areas that could be integrated into one feeder. So we're looking at that.
So when do you expect this decision to be made? I know we've been looking at it. So I feel like we've been looking at it for a really long time, but it may just be my perception. So I was curious, do we have an estimated time I can start getting in my mind when I think that you guys will have moved that forward and have some suggestions?
I think two things. One, the ERP replacement is a large project, and there may be parts of that project that are move forward more quickly. There may be some utilities modules that can move independently. But I would say that's a 3 to 5 year project. We're planning to come back to the council in February with an update on that project. Right now we're putting together and working on an RFP process, or selecting someone to help us put the RFP or RFI together. And thereafter, there will be a long process. And it will be a decision. Do we go with a centralized ERP? Do we break off modules for work order management or the utilities? So that will be a long project. It's a big investment, and it's a huge investment for the staff for the time to implement that type of system. I think on the short term, we're looking for best practices within our organization to say, how are the different departments interacting with PA 311 and the CIP work management system and process, and can we learn from each other and implement some best practices? So that's a short-term approach.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you. Liz? Aaron? Back to you. I guess I read through this and I was scratching in my head trying to say, gee, what can I make out of this? It's thin in the sense that all the backup material, the org charts and the management stuff isn't there. But I ended up getting a message, and tell me if I'm wrong. There's a lot of discussion in here about staff adjustments. Oh, we need one position here, one position there, a new position here, and putting people, hiring people, getting people into these positions to plug holes, fill gaps, move it into where there's more action going. Another item talked about staff recruitment and staff retention that we hear a lot of at the council of, we're not paying enough, or others are paying more, or people are leaving right after training, hard to get new people to come in at the right position. A third thing that shows up in here is career progression. You want to say, okay, one of the solutions here is to give people more cross-training programs where they become aware of a richer set of opportunities so they get a part of the whole. Then there was two other things on cost. There was a cost comparison of things like purchasing, IT, human resources, where are you getting a good deal in-house, or should you maybe look elsewhere? And that led to a discussion on outsourcing. Are there pieces or programs or parts of what you're doing that could be more effectively outsourced? I guess the conclusion I came to was we are one of the only cities with all our utilities. And we're not a giant city, not as big as Santa Clara, much less Oakland or Santa Clara even. You know, we're a small city. So are part of the problems that crop up in here, most of the problem areas you identified were in workforce, work management issues, is one of the problems that we have a small utility. You know, I said, gee, would it help if, why isn't the refuse fund in here? That's like a utility, and yet they're not in the utility department. The fiber group is not part of the utility.
It is.
It is, okay. But yeah, that would make the pool, the utility pool, a little bigger if the refuse fund, for example, was in here. But I guess it raises the issue, is that one of the fundamental problems we have in terms of having progressive careers, having a richer sense of opportunities for young players to come in and get experience in a variety of places? Is our size limiting our options with the workforce and organization?
You know, size can always make a bit of a difference in terms of having potentially more jobs within an organization. I think in our case, there's a lot of variety that can be had, and there's, I mean, in a sense, a fair amount of lateral movement that can also occur. What we have is a very high cost of living area that we serve. People can't live here. Indeed, some of the larger entities with different retirement plans are able to get a number of our key resources. Santa Clara is definitely one of them. And they do pay more, and that's what compels some of our employees to look in that direction. I don't know if being a larger, in terms of total employees, you know, I'm going to venture to guess that we have the same number of employees as the Santa Clara utilities, just because we have so many utilities. We have 250 employees in the utilities department. So when you say size, when you put it all together, I don't know that we're that small anymore. But we do have a lot of specialized positions within each of the different disciplines. You're not going to get an electrical. You're not going to get a business analyst being successful as an electrical engineer. So we do have certain requirements, and within those groups, they're fairly small groups. And
Yeah.
progression is a little bit harder in a smaller group
Yeah, I
sometimes.
was going to ask this. The progression opportunities there. Young players come in, they want to see in 5 years that they can get somewhere.
Yeah, it's probably potentially a little bit more limited. On the other hand, we have folks who have been here a long, long time. So clearly, the challenges have continued over the years to keep them here.
Yeah. What one of the things you mentioned in here is outsourcing. What was the outcome of the discussion on outsourcing?
I'm sorry, can you point me to that
I think the
section?
part we outsourced was the large water meter replacement, calibration. So we did do that last year, I think. And we didn't have the in-house staff to do all that. So we brought in an outside firm to help us with those meter replacements. We've also done
Electric
some
line work and construction.
that we just did recently with the overhead crew to help replace some of the maintenance work that's been on backlog.
Yeah.
And the primary staff have been responding mainly to emergency work, so we kind of fallen behind on the maintenance piece.
Yeah, I guess you would say by its very nature, outsourcing does not make a lot of sense for utilities.
Yeah, some outsourcing can definitely make sense, and we do contract for a lot of the services. Some outsourcing is structurally a little bit difficult for us because our workers are all in the SEIU bargaining unit, and a lot of other workers are in IBEW, for instance, and we normally don't have the cross-fertilization between those two groups. It's rare. And we're unique. Palo Alto's very unique in having SEIU as all of our
Yeah.
utilities workers. It's very unique.
Yeah. But I guess the conclusion of the study is that we're in good shape. We can identify these problems, but that's an important issue, being able to identify where to invest your time and effort. And looking ahead, you're optimistic about where the utility is, where they're going.
Yes.
I was thinking looking ahead might be a little ironic, though, isn't it?
We're in good shape.
She's leaving it in good shape.
Okay, is there any further comments by council members?
No, I'm dying to get onto solar.
Can
I hear
I ask you a
all
question,
about
if you
it.
know off the top of your head? How many people went to Santa Clara this year?
Maybe not all this year, but I think we've lost at least 5 of our dispatch operators. It's either 4 or 5 of those. I know we lost an electrical engineer, and we lost our utilities marketing services manager.
So that's 7 people?
Yeah, probably around there.
Out of 250 over the last couple of years?
So Santa Clara is an electric utility. For the people we're losing is electric only, and so
Right.
that's, and these are key positions. We're actually running our dispatch office vacant right now. It's 5, normally resourced with 5 employees. We have 2, one who I think is going to retire at the end of the year, and we'll be down to 1, and it's a 7x24 operation, which we're not running 7x24, we just don't have the manpower.
Is it primarily the electric utility where you have the turnover so high?
We lose a lot of electric workers to either fellow agencies. We lose 1 or 2 here and there to other agencies, a lot to Santa Clara. We also lose our gas workers to PG&E. And those are even rarer sometimes to come by. They're even harder to come by.
Is there anything that can be done through human resources in terms of identifying and locating, encouraging young people to do the appropriate preparation?
I would say Suzanne has already done some thinking on that front, and we're working on it.
Yeah. It seems there's a lot of young people out there who would love to have career opportunities.
Well, one thing we have been talking about is developing a focused career development program, supervisory training program in the utilities to help with that succession planning and really differentiate Palo Alto as an organization that invests in its employees and helps people move up. So we've talked about that. And, you know, trying to make sure that people do feel they have the opportunity here. So,
If I could jump in though, because we've discussed this for a while now. But in addition to that, even if we train and this is considered an exemplary place to be and so forth, we're going to continue having the problems with housing and with trying to live here. You know, it's one of those times when you say workforce housing might actually work, because anyone who goes to Santa Clara is going to be able to drive further south and get something for less, and quite a bit less actually, if you're willing to drive that extra 10 or 15 miles. So we're in a tough spot. You can't go anywhere from here in 10 or 15 miles and really lower your housing cost enormously. So I think that that is a persistent problem. And maybe it's something else, Val, and I don't know, but I think that's what we hear most of the time, is it's too expensive to live here.
You have to consider a lot of these are entry-level positions we're talking about in terms of who we want to attract and grow, and these are people who can support this particular cost of living area.
Yeah, I've raised that set of issues because
Yeah.
because those are the issues that emerge at council level.
So I just also want to jump in though. I don't think that, I think we want to be careful and not be the training ground.
Yeah.
Where we train people, we spend all the money, and then people take them once we've trained them well. I think if we really do have an issue with Santa Clara, we need to address it head on and make us as attractive or more attractive than Santa Clara.
If we were
And it's
Apple,
tough.
if we were Apple and Google, we'd just call it Santa Clara and make a deal.
We should have thought of that before.
Okay, if we could have a motion to send this to council.
So moved.
Second.
Any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. So that passes unanimously. Thank you very much. Brings us to item 2 on the agenda, PV Partners Program.
Thank you very much, Chair Schmidt. I have with me Resource Planner Amy Bailey and Assistant Director Jane Ratchey, who will jump in and rescue me if I stumble here. Oh, sorry. I think we also have Senior Resource Planner Shiva Swaminathan here.
We're forward thinking. Yeah.
Come up and did something like that many years ago. Once we can get the monitors to warm up, we have a brief presentation for you by Amy Bailey.
Don't go too far. I'm just going to grab some tea. I'll be listening.
Dr. Amy Bailey.
Thanks very much for the opportunity to speak. This presentation is all set as a short highlight reel of the staff report that you have, which has a great deal more detail. And it focuses on the local solar plan and gives you an update on the strategies that we've set out in the local solar plan that was adopted by council. And specifically, it focuses on a recommendation for PV Partners, which is the rebate program for customer-sited solar photovoltaics. So there is a recommendation associated with this item, and that is the one that you see here, to continue the PV Partners program for rebates until we've met the state legislative requirements set forth in the California Million Solar Roofs Bill. Once those requirements are fulfilled, we suggest not expanding the program further. So the City Council adopted the local solar plan on Earth Day on 2014, and it sets an overarching goal, which you see in the middle there, to achieve 4% of the city's energy needs by 2023, and that's up from around 0.7% when the plan was adopted in 2013. And around that central goal, you see a variety of different strategies to achieve it. And this is very much a cross-departmental effort. Some of the strategies relate to permitting costs, for instance, which is more, or permitting processes, which is more the development services, of course. Some is related to city facilities, so that's more public works, and so it's a citywide effort. There are.
Can I ask just one quick thing? Have there been conversations with any of the other government entities, with the school district, with anything like that? Or is this just our plan?
This is the city's overarching plan,
Right.
but we certainly have discussions with Palo Alto Unified School District fairly regularly, providing them support in
good.
kind of their decision-making processes. And actually, one of the 3 programs that is identified in the local solar plan is a solar donation program. And that is a program that was identified for staff research and development. And it would be to help nonprofits and schools in our community install solar. And that group, nonprofits, traditionally had a harder time because they don't have access to the incentives offered to tax-paying entities by the federal
Thanks.
government.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Okay. So there have been a number of achievements to date. I'm happy to report. Here is just a brief list. Attachment B of the staff report gives you a strategy by strategy update, both on kind of what we've achieved and also kind of what's in the pipeline in the near term. So, for instance, a few things that have been going on. We completed a GIS-based solar technical potential assessment and published that map online. We also participated in a regional group buy program, which is a program which aggregates the purchasing power of many different homeowners such that they can get a discounted price for their solar systems. And so that resulted in around a quarter of a megawatt of solar installed in Palo Alto and over 800 kilowatts across the Bay Area. So it was a very successful program as a whole. Another program that we've been working on and anticipate coming back to you with a proposal on is a community solar program, which would allow anyone to participate in solar, including renters, those in townhouses, those with shaded roofs, et cetera. So there are a lot of things happening, so I encourage you to look through attachment B for the blow-by-blow account. Okay, so here's a graph to show the solar PV installed on Palo Alto to date. So on the left axis is the system count, which corresponds to the line. So we have almost 800 systems. And on the right axis is the installed capacity, so approaching 7 megawatts. And this last data point is for 2015, but it actually only goes through August. So you can expect that number to be higher. Okay. All right, so that's kind of the general local solar plan update. I'd be happy to answer more any detailed questions you have about it. But here we focus more on the PV Partners program. And sorry, I didn't know if you had a question right now.
I do, but I'll hold it.
Whatever you prefer.
No, go ahead.
Yeah, why don't you
finish?
Great. Okay, so on to PV Partners then. PV Partners is a rebate program for customer-sided solar PV, and it's for both residential and commercial customers. It was established in 1999. In 2006, the budget was increased significantly by $13 million, and that was to be in compliance with SB 1, Senate Bill 1, the so-called Million Solar Roofs Bill. And so that $13 million had an associated goal of reaching an additional 6.5 megawatts of PV capacity by 2017. So at the bottom of the slide here, you can see a table of the program capacity to date. So the left column is prior to SB1. Then the next column is installed under SB1 as of August 1st. Then we also have pending and reserved projects, and then we have some unreserved capacity as well. We still have some rebate funds available. And at the end of this program, it would result in over 8 megawatts. And so that's a big amount of solar. It's been a very successful program, and we've received a lot of awards for it. Okay, so some recent activity related to PV Partners. As of August 2014, all of the residential rebate funds were completely reserved. In March of 2015, you may recall the Finance Committee requested staff examine options for continuing PV Partners rebate funds for residential use. That was actually in the context of discussing the CLEAN program, the feed-in tariff program we have. In September 2015, all of the large commercial rebate funds were fully reserved. So actually what we have available right now is a little over $500,000, specifically for small commercial customers served by the E2 and E4 rates. And so this presentation is in part because the Finance Committee requests to come back with an evaluation of options. So after analyzing the program and the alternatives, the staff recommendation is to just continue the program as planned until we've achieved our legislative mandates and then actually let it sunset. And the reasoning behind that recommendation is mainly fourfold. The first is that the SB1, Senate Bill 1 Million Solar Roof Bill, Million Solar Roofs Bill, will have been achieved once we commit all of those funds. So that was both kind of a numerical goal. In our case, 6.5 megawatts is our allocated goal, but it was also, the implicit goal was to create a self-sustaining solar market. And if you look at residential solar installations in Palo Alto, and the same has happened in the PG&E service territory and elsewhere, after rebate funds have been fully reserved, it hasn't slowed. So the residential uptake is still significant. So the second is that the objective of lowering the cost of solar can be achieved in other ways. And specifically, a group buy type of a program is one way to get at lowering the system costs. And that's simply by facilitating households that aggregate their purchasing power. 3, the PV Partners program does have significant administrative costs. And 4, and that's especially compared to a group buy type of a program. And 4, making rebate funds available again to residential customers would result in disruptive market dynamics and also potentially marginalization of those residents that decided to install solar without rebates. So you have around 15 months of solar installations that have occurred since those rebate funds were closed. And so that's the staff recommendation.
So did you just say that the evidence was from other cities that when the rebate program ends, residential solar adoption continues pretty much on the same trajectory it was before?
That's what we've observed in Palo Alto. And that in PG&E territory, they ceased taking applications for residential rebates in 2013. And so actually, PG&E and the IOUs, it's almost, there's only like a little bit of funding left. For the most part, it's already been allocated.
The dumb inference from that would be, geez, the PV Partners program isn't having any impact, right? Or at least at this point in time. It certainly did before, but today.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't we take? You said it was like $500,000 left in it. Why wouldn't we take that and use it on fuel switching or something else?
Well, that $13 million is a statutory requirement.
Okay.
Did you say explicitly that in the PG&E area, their rebate program stopped in 2013?
For residential.
Right, but that residential solar has continued to grow at the same pace.
Right.
And that's been the observation. I mean, of course, they have different rate structures in place, and so the economics are a bit different. But even we can look in Palo Alto for the last 15 months.
Yeah, I'm looking at outside of Palo Alto.
Yeah, and outside of Palo.
Because one of the macro effects here is that the cost of utility-grade solar is now competitive with fossil fuel solar, right? But that's utilities, not residential, right? And and you said it's statutory that we have to use the whole, even though the SB1 goals have been met on a statewide basis, we still have to.
We need to spend our 13 million.
How frustrating. But that leads me right to where I was going with this, because you're saying number 2 is lowering the cost can be achieved in other ways, and what Eric just said is yes, there are many other ways now. So would that indicate that even if with this, actually was what my husband asked this morning, he said, why haven't we got some farms of solar around? Is that just not cost effective?
When you say farms, you mean like a...
Meaning, I know at the county we had every possible parking structure covered, the hospital is covered. I mean, every place we could think of, we put solar. But maybe, and that was, 3 or 4 years ago, so perhaps that number 2 is what's significant, is that the other ways now of getting solar are much less costly, so we've achieved our goal. Is that what you're saying in the end?
So I guess the residential solar market is very distinct from like the commercial solar market, which is very distinct from the utility scale solar market. And so to answer your question, I would need to go through kind of all 3. But this particular one is kind of referring to the residential market in specific. So first of all, there are still other incentives available, specifically the federal investment tax credit. That it does have a step down, which is going to happen at the end of 2016. So that's coming. But also residential systems also have another incentive, which is the next item in the discussion, and that's net metering. And so there are some other incentives, but this was referring to, for instance, aggregating purchasing power to get a lower system price, as opposed to kind of throwing money at it and and buying down the price from all of the other ratepayers. So that's what that was referring to. Yeah. And there are additionally other ways to lower the cost of solar. The Development Center has done some amazing things in streamlining their permitting process. It used to be the case, and hopefully it's still not, but it used to be the case that there was kind of a Palo Alto surcharge. These are things that I've heard from developers for installing here because it was very difficult to go through the permitting process. So when you've streamlined the process like they've done, and it's now over the counter, that really removes a lot of the red tape, and those are costs that developers don't pass on to the customers.
It's still always is so complex in really figuring out what is the installation, and then what is the cost as it has to be replaced as you go along, and then how do you really figure out whether or not you came out ahead? I don't know whether we did or not, but I mean, we simply had to do this according to the SB1 goals, but it's always kind of a conundrum in a way, don't you think?
Yeah. I think there's been a recent report from Lawrence Berkeley National Lab on studying the California Solar Initiative, which is the IOU version of the Million Solar Roofs bill. And so I think there will be some interesting retrospective studies to try to answer that. So hopefully we will get some answers, at least on a state level. So. Okay.
So you talked about one of the ways to lower the cost of solar is to do aggregate buying. Do we have any city programs to be the facilitator of the aggregate buying for people?
So the Peninsula SunShares program, the program that took place over the summer, is kind of a solar group buy program. But it typically takes place over a specified period of time, like 2 months. And you have to register during that 2-month period and sign a contract by a certain date if you decide to move forward. So we did offer that over the summer, and actually at least one of the developers that have participated in that continues to offer that discounted pricing after the group buy program.
We had the highest response rate of all the participating agencies.
Yeah.
So are we going to do this again?
So that's something that...
No, too much shade.
If I could just explain, so that structure was really beneficial to Palo Alto residents. Foster City actually was sort of the transacting agency in a way, and we just sort of rode on their tails. And we were really fortunate that we were able to do that, so it actually didn't cost
us anything.
Pretty much nothing. And yet our customers had the benefit of this discounted purchase program. And if they another agency steps up and offers to do it again, I'm sure we'll certainly jump in there and ask to be part of it.
Okay, but we're not planning on jumping up and offering.
Not right now. We're not gonna run it for the county.
Where was the project Foster City invested in?
They actually contracted with Vote Solar, I think, to actually go and find contractors who could do these turnkey solutions for residential customers.
In
and
Foster City?
Foster City just itself was the agency that helped aggregate all this interest in neighboring communities and within its own city. And the more people you had participate, the lower the price. So they had an incentive for their own community to get other communities involved.
Yeah, I guess my question was it electricity for use in the community, or did it enter the grid somewhere in California?
It offset somebody's use at their house.
Yeah, so it was an offset rather than, okay.
I just asked Art quietly if he had any panels on his roof. To either of you?
Trees.
Just out of curiosity.
Do trees count?
I'll move the staff recommendation.
And I'd second that.
Okay, do you want to comment?
You know, it seems to make sense given where we are.
Yeah, I guess, we've been enthusiastic backers of the PD Partners program, so it's funny to be sitting here saying, stop it. But I guess you make a case that there are other things coming down the road, other options that are viable. I recall, not so long ago, we were looking at the commercial side and guaranteeing for 20 years a rate that was 50% above what the residential customers were getting. The CLEAN program. Can you comment on that? Why?
So the CLEAN program price and the entire program is kind of reevaluated annually, and I believe that that's a topic of the UAC meeting tomorrow, and so it would head to you in January or February.
So can I understand, I don't know that I followed your question fully. Are you, so I don't mean to...
We're voting, the motion on the floor is to cut the PV Partners program, which is a residential subsidy. There still retains some commercial subsidy, which will continue to be offered for a year and a half or something. And then we also, in addition, voted the CLEAN program, which seemed to be a clear subsidy. So I guess I'm concerned that we're voting here to back off a little bit on the residential side while continuing to offer some pretty substantial subsidies.
But I think that was in council. I mean, actually think, didn't we as a finance committee oppose that?
Yeah.
And then I think Liz changed her mind. But the three of us, when we went to council, opposed that.
It was Liz's fault.
I think it was all Liz. So when you say, why are we offering
It's
that?
always
Just
fun
turn
to
this
be-
way and stare at Liz. There's your answer.
It's always fun to be the only woman.
That's right. That's right.
My unique position.
I just wondered if you had a comment on what, I feel that, residents are important to get them involved. We've done a good job in the past in having a responsive resident community, and yet we seem to have, heavy subsidies. Our heavy subsidies are going to commercial operations.
So I guess we wouldn't really call it a subsidy. We'd call it, or I think you all called it an incentive that you added to the avoided cost to create the price for the CLEAN feed-in tariff. You'll certainly have another opportunity to review it again when it comes to the Finance Committee and then the Council next year. Amy's correct. It is going to the Utilities Advisory Commission tomorrow night for their review. Yes, there is a pretty substantial incentive in the CLEAN price. There have been no takers.
Right.
The incentive hasn't been enough to attract takers. I think actually right now, as you all know, there have been discussions with regard to putting photovoltaics on some city garages. And when those are developed, they would that project over several city garages would presumably take advantage of the clean tariff. You all decided a while ago that it was worth it to try to create a program that would attract somebody, just so we would have some knowledge of what a feed-in tariff does. We kept the total megawatts for the clean program. That was one risk mitigation. Whether or not you think running the clean program at the current price level is the correct thing to do, I don't know. But certainly for tomorrow night, that's what we're proposing.
Yeah, I guess for tonight and what we're voting, would it make more sense to spend the clean money on subsidizing the PV partner program?
I think that's what we suggested to council, and they shut us down. I think that was exactly what we suggested.
I don't remember precisely, but I remember that it was quite a discussion.
I thought we suggested putting it on fuel switching and heat pump housing and stuff like that.
So what ultimately came out of, I think, your motion at council was that the clean tariff would go forward, but the monies that were
it would be rebated
gained from the leases, would be rebated to the ratepayers.
To avoid the issue of transfer of funds from the
That's correct.
Not that we ever do that, but.
So the motion tonight, though, just ends the PV partner program. It does not say anything about other programs. I think the next item on the agenda probably moves into.
But as we've heard, the people are going to still install solar even without the PV program. So.
Well, and to be clear, I mean, we have different elements of the local solar plan that Amy went through, and what we do with some successor to the PV Partners program is one element of it. The clean tariff is another element of it. It's all part of the big local solar plan.
Would it be correct to say we're moving from PV Partners into the other part of the program?
Or looking for a success. We certainly intend to find a successor to the PV Partners program, which might not be a straight-up rebate the way it's been in the past.
In addition to the NEM?
Or in conjunction with what you have right now in terms of the NEM. But yeah, even the NEM will need to consider what happens over time.
Yeah. No. Jane?
Jane Rassi, Assistant Director. I just wanted to make one comment. The reason that we created the local solar plan in the first place is we saw the PV partner mandate and that the money was going to be spent. So that mandate was going to be over. We saw the net energy metering requirement, and that's another transfer of funds from one group to another, also coming up to its cap. And so we needed to try to develop a program that didn't have all these transfers of funds from one group to another. And that's what the local solar program is trying to do. It has all the different programs that Amy kind of talked about and that are described in the report that attempt to still support and encourage solar, but use different mechanisms, because we'll be done with the mandates that we had to do in the form of the rebates from the Senate Bill 1 and the net energy metering. And that was the whole point of creating the local solar plan. And so, and it worked. All these subsidies that were there, you saw the price fall, and now it's, hopefully it doesn't need that. And we found that with the group buy program, when we could get the price down, there was still participation.
Yeah, I guess just as a naive outsider, I'm confused with all the different programs going on, and which one makes sense and is the right one to jump into. Okay, any further comments then?
I just have one brief question.
Yeah.
So the clean stuff will go to the UAC and then it'll come back to us, right? And then it'll go to council.
That's correct.
So you've got a chance to weigh in a second time.
You can just wash it again.
I guess the one thing we can't do, though, after tonight, is to put it into the PV Partners program.
I guess not.
That we're crossing off.
That would be correct.
Okay. There's no other comments then? All in favor? Aye. All opposed? So that passes unanimously. Thank you.
Okay, so now we're on to item 3, and again, we have Dr. Amy Bailey here, who will discuss net energy metering successor program design guidelines.
But it's hard to spell.
Okay. Thanks again for the opportunity to speak. As Val said, this is a discussion about design guidelines for the net energy metering successor program, which is the term that we're using to describe the terms and conditions for customer-sided generation installed after our NEM cap has been reached. So first I'll go over some background to make sure that everyone's on the same page with what net energy metering is. Then specifically talk a bit about the electric cost of service analysis, some of the challenges and benefits of NEM, or net energy metering, NEM for short. Then the proposed NEM successor program design guidelines. Okay. So for background, NEM is a state policy put in place to provide an incentive to renewable energy that's installed behind the customer meter, or in this case, if it's solar PV, it's rooftop solar. And in Palo Alto, all of the net energy metering capacity is from solar PV, although in principle you could have other technologies apply for this billing arrangement. So for NEM customers, the utility takes the amount that they consume in that month, they subtract the amount that is generated from their on-site system, and then we apply the relevant retail rate to the difference to determine what the customer owns. And so NEM is often referred to as rolling back the customer meter. It's kind of an intuitive way to describe what's going on. So the Public Utilities Code specifies that utilities must offer NEM up to a certain cap. Our cap is 9.5 megawatts, and we're already over 75% towards meeting that cap. And it's difficult to predict when we might meet it, because if we have a couple big commercial installations, it can happen very quickly. But our current estimate is in mid-2016, so pretty soon. And when we do meet that cap, any solar installed behind the customer meter after that point will be subject to a different set of terms and conditions, what we're calling the NEM successor program. So staff will develop this successor program in coordination with the electric utilities cost of service analysis. What will pop out of this process is a rate, although we're using the term program because it's a bit friendlier, but it falls within kind of what a rate is and within what is happening with the rates group. So here's a slide of cumulative installed NEM capacity in blue. And again, this is all solar PV in Palo Alto. And our NEM cap is shown in this graph in red. So the 2005 data point, that's just through mid-August. So it's higher already, and we could reach it.
Yeah.
Right.
I was thinking, yes, that's back away.
2015. So we're already over 75% towards meeting this cap. So the point of this graph is that we're getting close, and we need to put a program in place for customers installing solar after we reach it. As you all know, there is an electric cost of service analysis underway, and there was a set of design guidelines for that work that was adopted by Council in September. And there are two specific guidelines that are relevant for the NEM successor program. The first one is Guideline 1, and this is the Proposition 26 inspired design guideline that rates must be based on the cost to serve customers. And just like with all of the rates, with the NEM successor program, that program must be based on the cost to serve customers. And that's the overriding design guideline of the COSA and the successor program.
Could I interrupt for a second? The same numbers show up for NEM and for the PV partners. Do people get both a subsidy plus the NEM.
Yeah, yeah.
And once the PV partner's out, then they would get only half or some portion of the subsidy they were.
That's what had to happen, right? So when the PV partners for residential customers was fully reserved in August of 2014, after that, solar customers, our customers who install solar would only get from us the net metering subsidy.
So this is not a replacement for PV partner. It's an additional program.
Well, it's an additional statutory requirement. And, you know, a lot of these incentives kind of have combined in the past to make solar economic, including the federal tax credits.
Okay.
And they're kind of slowly winding down. Okay. So the other guideline that's relevant from the COSA design guidelines is Guideline 7, and this is the one that specifically addressed solar. It's saying that the COSA should evaluate the impact of rate designs on the economics of local solar for both current customers, those that have net metering right now, that have solar installations right now, and also future customers. And the COSA should be coordinated with an analysis of long-term solar policies to be put in effect after the NEM cap is reached. And so that's what this is. This is the successor program.
So when we do these programs, are we guaranteeing that they get paid a certain amount for their solar for a certain number of years, or in the net metering, or we can change it every year if they get paid?
So we will do a cost of service analysis, and we will create rates that are based on that analysis. Rates will come out of that analysis, and then we'll have you approve them, and that'll, depending on how often we do the cost of service analysis or update the numbers, we'll come back to you with updated
So we're not
numbers.
locking ourselves into it with our residential customers of what we buy their solar power back.
Only for as long as your approval applies. So
Right, so you can
annual,
change it anytime.
typically, yeah. Or we've had frozen electric rates since 2009, I think. So that's been
So I'll be quick and let you get back to your presentation, but the NEM cap is a capacity cap. Right?
Correct.
So let's say I have solar on my house right now, and I'm participating in NEM. And then in the middle of next year, we go over the cap. And then a year after that, Liz installs the same gear on her house that I have on mine. Is she going to have the same rate plan as I do, or is she going to have a different one?
And a better one.
And a better, probably a worse one.
So she would have
Will we all have the same, or will some people grandfather? I guess that's my question.
They would be grandfathered. Those who install their systems within the cap, it'd be kind of like a cell phone plan when you're grandfathered into a certain.
So that was my question, but does council have the ability to change that and bring everyone to the same rate plan at some point, or not?
I don't think so.
So they become a legacy cost of the system.
We can look at that again carefully. I don't know if you guys know the legal answer to that, but I think that they are in that program.
So they're a legacy cost of the system because they're being subsidized by the other ratepayers.
They are.
And so they become a legacy cost.
Do
And
you
council
know
has
the answer?
it becomes like a pension obligation or any other obligation of which you have no ability to change it
So I think
at some point.
Amy will be able to shed a bit more light on that.
So the subsidy comes into effect predominantly with tiered rates. So since you're rolling back the electricity meter, for instance, if you're really, let's say you're a larger energy consumer and you consume 1,000 kilowatt hours a month or something like that, then if you size your solar system to meet your load, you could actually have a $0 bill for the entire year. So I have a couple backup slides, maybe with an illustration that I think might help. So this is true. This example household, for instance, sized their solar PV system to meet exactly what their on-site load is.
Right.
However, if you change the E1 rate structure such that there is a minimum charge or a fixed charge, that will affect how much of a how much of a cost shift exists or how much of a subsidy
So we
exists.
could move to some fixed charges if we wanted to.
Right, but the grandfather wouldn't have the fixed charge.
So the grandfathered people will still be subject to the E1 rates, and so they would if there is a fixed charge that is incorporated into the E1 rate, then they would be subject to that as well. If rates increase, they'd be subject to that as well. But in your example, you mentioned if someone else installs a solar system a year or two later, they would be on a completely different rate schedule that's very clearly cost neutral. And it's not going to be better. I'm sorry.
Of course not. And that lasts for 50 years or a lifetime.
The panels don't last that long, but.
It's like a grid.
But can you replace the panels and keep the same system?
Fast.
No, in the investor-owned utility territory, they've already, through the CPUC, they've already defined a transition period of 20 years. And so in that case, from the date of interconnection, they are eligible to stay on the E1 rate schedule for a 20-year period of time.
Okay.
And so in combination with developing a NEM successor program, another work item is to develop some grandfathering policy that would establish likely some transition period like what exists in the investor-owned utility territories. And also some people may want to increase the size of their system, so there would be also some other issues to address in the grandfathering policy.
Just also a quick question. Would Santa Clara or Anaheim or another similar city be dealing with this same issue?
Yeah.
So is there anything we have learned from them, or?
Yeah, there are a couple municipal utilities so Proposition 26, of course, applies to public-owned utilities. And so we have, if we look to our muni peers, Turlock Irrigation District and the City of Lompoc both have exceeded their NEM cap. And so they have successor tariff programs in place. And so I was actually on the phone with one of them today, and so we are certainly learning from their experience. But there are a whole host of other munis that are currently developing their successor tariff programs right now within kind of the same constraints that we are subject to. And so there's a working group that we have. We're certainly learning a lot from each other.
Okay, yeah, that's good. That's good to know. I think this is kind of new territory, and it's just very helpful to talk to someone else who's either done it and it's over, or they're still in the process.
Okay. So regarding the existing NEM program, there are a few key challenges, but also a few key benefits. So the challenges include it can result in a cost shift between customers. It also presents challenges for utility to sustainably recover the fixed costs associated with our distribution system. So those are more longer-term challenges. And also with current electric rates, so for instance, our tiered residential rates, if you're a low energy consumer and for instance, you've already done a lot of energy efficiency and conservation, you would actually be compensated at an effectively lower rate compared to a high energy consumer, because what the compensation is tied to what your consumption is. However, there are also some key benefits. It's a very intuitive program, like rolling back the electricity meter. People understand that, and it's easy to communicate. It's also possible to implement with existing metering equipment, and it's viewed as one of the key state policies responsible for the extent of solar PV deployment to date. So for the development of the NEM successor program, similar to the COSA design guidelines, we have a set of proposed design guidelines for your review. And the intent of having these design guidelines is to go through the stakeholder review process early on in the design phase and get your feedback. That way, when we come back with a proposal, we know that during the program research and development, we were on the right track. So here are 3 of the design guidelines. First, evaluate program options that compensate customers fairly and equitably for local renewable energy production. So this is really aligning kind of costs and benefits. The second one is to consider specifically compensating solar participants at a rate equivalent to the value of solar to Palo Alto via a value of solar tariff. The third one is to evaluate the impact on the concurrent adoption of on-site generation and other demand-side technologies, such as energy storage, smart thermostats, interactive loads, etc. So there may be some synergies that will exist, and we want to understand what the implications would be of a successor program. Given that we have this local...
Can I just stop you? What does that mean? Consider compensating solar participants at a rate equivalent to the value of solar in Palo Alto.
Okay. So this would be like a feed-in tariff for residential.
So this would be like we come up with whatever number we thought was appropriate. Is that it? Just like we're doing to get uptake? Or?
Well, I saw in here, it looks like the focus is on the avoided cost. Is that right?
Yeah, so it would be very similar. So part of the reason why we added this as a design guideline, I mean, our community is familiar with the CLEAN program, which is, a feed-in tariff program. And, well, those who are interested, know that there's this avoided cost and that the council made a determination of some added value. So there's this framework that our community is familiar with. You could apply that same framework at a residential level. And so that's what effectively that this would be. But this is just, one option that would be on the table for research and development and evaluation. So. Then number 4 is to assess the likely impact on the rate of solar adoption and implications for meeting the local solar plan goal. 5 is to evaluate, how easy or difficult it may be to market and communicate the program to customers. And then the last one is to assess the technology constraints of program implementation. So we have existing metering equipment in place and also a specific customer information system, billing system. And so that this is referring to those in specific. Okay, so the next...
Are you looking at, as part of this, are you looking at sort of time of day pricing as one of the variables?
So that is an option that could be considered. Yeah.
I thought we didn't have the software yet to do it. On the billing, I thought there was some issue like that.
You're right.
We do have an issue, but I certainly think that was that phase 2 of the cost of service analysis where we were actually going to look a little bit more at the different time periods where energy could be purchased.
So I thought this was actually an SAP issue going back to the earlier item.
It is. It is for now, so that's why we didn't put it in the phase 1 COSA study. We put it, I think, in phase 2, which is going to lag.
Okay.
And hopefully coincide with when we have a new system.
A few lines of C++.
Yeah, let's take care of it.
So the next steps would be to do the research and development in coordination with the COSA this winter and have a proposal in spring. And so we have a lot of work to do in the coming couple months. Okay, so here's the recommendation again, and that is the staff and the UAC recommend that the Finance Committee recommend the City Council approve the proposed net energy metering successor program design guidelines. So thanks very much. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Good. Questions, comments?
Good presentation, thank you.
Greg, do you have anything?
I will, but I'll let someone else start.
Oh, you go ahead.
No, I'm not ready.
Oh, come on, Greg. Take a turn.
Well, let me jump in. The COSA guidelines has as their number 1 rate must be based on the cost to serve customers, which all the other utilities, water, refuse, and so on, are struggling with. Because of the difficulties of trying to get tiered or conservation-oriented pricing in there. Now, I notice in your guidelines you don't have that. And one of the problems you point out with the current guideline is it gives different incentives to different groups, and some of these programs you propose of dealing with rates would do the same thing. Is there Prop 218 conflict in here?
So thank you very much for asking this question. So this, the COSA design guidelines should be considered the primary design guidelines, including, for the NIM successor program. And so what we have here is you could consider a set of subsidiary design guidelines, given the community does have a special interest in solar. And so those COSA design guidelines, specifically Guideline 1, that is the overarching design guideline also for the development of a NIM successor tariff.
Well, the NIM itself.
Could I answer you with regard to Prop 218? So Prop 218 does apply to fee-based services like water and refuse. It actually doesn't apply to electric or gas.
But there's an equivalent.
Prop 26 does, and Prop 26 it sort of comes up with a reasonable cost to serve. It's not as prescribed as Prop 218 with regard to conservation pricing. It's probably a little bit more forgiving at this point, although it still can create challenges.
Yeah.
So, sorry, just to answer your question.
Okay, I guess I'm concerned because you do mention one of the challenges is cost shifting. And even some of the alternatives you talked about would have some cost shifting associated with it. And so I'm wondering, how sensitive we need to be to a NIM which would penalize or hurt, as you point out, conservers.
Are you referring to specifically the customers within the NIM cap under the existing NIM program, or after?
After.
After, okay.
I thought you said in the transition out, there's some description of possibilities of how to deal with this.
Mm-hmm.
But it seems as though those possibilities included maintaining some kind of cost shifting.
So the possibilities that would be, we'll defer to the city attorney's office, of course, but the possibilities that would be on the table would, make sure that would pass the city attorney's office as a legal assessment to not expose us to risk.
Should that be one of the guidelines?
So one option could be maybe to duplicate the COSA design guideline in these guidelines to make it very clear. That could be an option. Or if there's some way that we could...
Well, I don't know if all their guidelines fit in, but it seems to me you do want to increase incentives as much as possible for the utilization of PV, solar, but you do want to make sure that there's not cost shifting taking place that favors a grandfathered group or some other group that, even those who are conserving, it would be good to reward them, but can you do that under the Prop 26?
Okay. This one? So I guess here's an illustration of our current rate structure. So the first three bars are the first, second, and third tiers in our residential rate. The red portion of the bar is the cost associated with the commodity portion. And the green bars are for our distribution system here in Palo Alto, and then the purple is the public benefits. And on the right is the avoided cost of solar sited locally here within Palo Alto. And there's kind of a breakdown on the different contributions to the value of the avoided cost. So as you can see here, the avoided cost or the value of local solar is lower than the rate that people are being compensated, given that under net energy metering, people are being compensated at the retail rate, which includes all three of these buckets of categories. So
I think you mentioned in the text the importance of maintaining your infrastructure, of this continual capital reinvestment. And those who are in net metering avoid that capital investment cost or put the burden on others. So I just want to make sure that we are sensitive to making sure there's some kind of commodity cost included, even if they are.
Do you have residents who ask about this and have some sense that there could be some inequalities? Does anyone ever pick up on this? Because we're getting very technical. So might I call and say, well, I'm really upset because Greg has solar and his is going to be less than mine is.
He will next week.
Right.
There's a small cap coming up.
Right.
Small window of opportunity. Yeah. Better move quickly.
You better get right over there. I mean, do you have people who say that they really know this is going on and therefore they're troubled about it? I have never heard any citizen talk to me about their. They talk to me about the rates, of course, because supposedly ours our general rates are supposedly lower than PG&E's and so forth. But does anyone ever come to you and actually say, we're troubled about this, the tiering and so forth? A citizen, not a business, because a business you might find a very different kind of
I have heard people talking about water and about refuse.
Yes,
on that
those
issue.
Especially, but not about electricity, which is interesting.
That's because it's 25% cheaper than.
That's right. I think that's so. I don't hear much about this. Water we hear about all the time, for the obvious reasons, and yes, the garbage cans. There's always been a big discussion, but I think Greg is right. We have low rates, so much of the time people aren't really in this very narrow band of discerning that my next door neighbor got a good deal and I didn't get in on it on time.
Yeah, I could say that I personally, I don't really receive kind of customer inquiries very often. It's more of my colleagues who deal with customer inquiries. So I'd have to ask them if they get a lot of questions regarding this. I think that public awareness is kind of picking up. There was a very public study done, commissioned by the CPUC, carried out by E3, which is an energy consulting firm, on this cost shift that exists and the fact that the people who are installing solar tend to be wealthier, and so the burden becomes one between kind of high income versus low income.
So it's a have and have not kind of issue.
That was kind of one result of the study.
I would not have thought of that one. Yeah. So thanks.
I think from our perspective, the issue is really Proposition 26 and making sure whatever proposal we have is compliant with that, which it will be. So.
Okay. One last question. How many residents do we have who have some kind of solar? Do you have a percentage or a number or?
Around 800.
Around 800? 22,000 houses or 15,000 houses, right? And another 10,000 apartments. Are some of them on apartments or not? Is this just primarily private homes?
It's normally single-family detached or kind of duplexes, but I think that there is kind of an apartment complex area that has kind of solar installed all across it, but that's not the majority.
And is there any particular part of town that has more solar than others? I don't know.
I'm not sure.
I'm serious. I would be interested in knowing, because we do know that there are more trees in North Palo Alto, in good part because of the sidewalk configuration, than there is in South Palo Alto, where you have the rolling sidewalks. And it would seem as though, as could I say out loud why you don't have solar?
Yeah.
Too many trees.
No. In my case, it's the apartment building next door.
Oh, it's 101 Elma, isn't it? Yeah.
I wish it were trees.
Yeah. In our case, it would be trees, though. There are those huge old evergreens that I just as soon take down in a flash. But that would definitely interfere with solar. And I hadn't thought of it as to where in the community you might find more solar than others.
So we do have a GIS map of rooftops across the city, and actually their suitability for solar. So that would be an easy thing to determine.
Could you send that to us or something?
Yeah, that would be very interesting. Greg, you had some.
I do. Okay, so I just want to understand this from the big picture to start with. So the NEM is a regulatory approach. So we have to spend that money. We're spending that money. We get up to the 9.5%. We no longer 9.5 megawatts, right? We no longer have to then do that. At that point, we develop a successor program. What you're asking us to do today is whether or not the rate guidelines for that successor program are acceptable to us as a committee. So that's the task we have today. So I need to understand what these guidelines actually do in terms of creating the rates. So the first thing is you have the COSA design guidelines. Now, the COSA design guidelines are set forth by some other entity, aren't they? I mean, we didn't develop all the COSA ones.
You did. You adopted them.
So we adopted all the COSA design guidelines
Correct.
a long time ago. Okay. So are they just Palo
in
Alto?
September.
Are they just Palo Alto's COSA design guidelines, or are they?
They're ours.
They're ours. Okay.
But they're not in there.
No,
They're not in the proposal.
No, they're not the proposal. I understand. But the ones that we've adopted before that are relevant to us are rate guideline 1 and guideline 7, right?
In particular, right now.
And so, basically, so number 1 basically says the cost to serve customers. That means that we don't support cross subsidization, basically, right? Is that the rate must be based on the cost to serve the customer. So that's the number 1 override, and that's the overriding principle of what we're doing. And so that's included. And then guideline 7, the COSA invalid impact of rate designs on the economics of local solar for current and future customers, and should be coordinated with analysis. What does that mean? I mean, a practical point, what does that mean?
Okay. So that guideline is the guideline that highlights kind of the relationship between rates and solar, and that we need to pay attention to, well, solar customers, basically. So if, I believe it's attachment B, which shows all of the COSA design guidelines, I think, if you'd like to.
B, yeah.
And that's
saw them somewhere.
Attachment C, okay, attachment B.
47,
Yes, okay.
And so this, guideline 7 was the one that addressed specifically solar PV, in part because our community has an interest and we have this plan, and it's
So you said solar PV. That's different than what we're talking about here. So does it apply just to solar PV, or does it apply to all solar?
You're referring to solar thermal as well?
No, I'm implying this is not solar PV, right? This is the NEM project, and this net metering you put on solar panels, and this is solar panels versus solar PV.
They're the same.
Oh, it's the same thing.
Yeah,
Sorry.
they're the
Okay,
same thing.
got it. I was thinking of the program we just killed.
That's also
Right.
for solar PV, PV
Okay.
partners.
That's PV partners.
Yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
I'm confused. Okay. Okay, so these 9 guidelines we've already approved. So what you're asking us to do is to add in addition these 6.
So right, so these are specifically for the NEM successor program, that given, and which in Palo Alto means it's for impact solar PV, and given the interest in solar PV, the idea was that we should have a set of subsidiary design guidelines, the ones that we're proposing here, to give the opportunity for all of the stakeholders to provide feedback.
Okay. And then, so what do these guidelines do that are not included in the current 9 guidelines?
So for instance, guideline 1,
Yep.
in this case, it's referring to aligning costs and benefits, so it could be considered, within just being consistent with guideline 1 of the COSA design guidelines. So that one, but it's specifically referring to the fact that with tiered rates, if you're a low energy consumer, you're not compensated very much, and you're basically discouraged from adopting solar PV compared to those in higher tiers. And so this is to say, well, in NIM, that is the case with our current rates, but with a successor program, we could address that.
How would we address that?
So can I suggest that this also recognizes the value of local renewable energy as opposed to remote renewable energy?
But let's talk about that on a high level before we just say stuff like that. First of all, we have carbon neutral electricity in Palo Alto. So it's not about greenhouse gas emissions, right? It's not about reducing that. What this is about is whether or not there's a value in having some local solar, right? And if we add in the avoided cost, which I assume is rate number 2, consider compensating solar at a rate equivalent to the value of solar Palo Alto. I think that's what we mean by that. At least that's sort of what I understood.
Well, can I suggest that equitable compensation for local energy renewable production might include things like, well, since it's local, certain costs are avoided, like we don't have to pay for transmission and things like that. So that's sort of, correct me if I'm wrong, that's sort of embedded in number 1. In number 2,
so I don't think you're right.
When you talk about value, you could determine that it's worth it to put an incentive payment for this kind of local solar, different from what the avoided cost might be. I look at 2 as not a direct avoided cost. It's avoided cost plus or minus any ancillary value you might identify.
Any cross subsidization.
Plus or minus any value, additional value.
Yeah, this came when it came up before, right? I mean, the arguments presented were, well, the transmission grid between here and Fresno might go down, right? So there's value to having some here, as an insurance kind of thing, and I think that's the kind of value you're talking about, right?
Right, or you don't have any greenhouse gases from all the transmission that's going across the state of California because it's right here. You might avoid even some greenhouse gas emissions. Who knows? Right.
Greenhouse gas from transmission. But I think the UAC might be taking up this issue tomorrow, right? Which is what's the value of having it locally versus. I don't know if they're going to do that or not, but I remember in the last meeting, right? They said that maybe we should look at that. So I don't know if they're going to do it or not. Do you know if they're going to look at that or not?
I didn't bring the. I think what they're looking at is the clean.
Right, for the feed-in tariff.
Right.
Right, but I think they were going to look at that, right? Because there was a little bit of discussion at the last meeting.
It's certainly. I think it can be embedded in the discussions.
So what I'm understanding, though, is what I heard you say is different than what I heard you say, and I thought what you said was probably right, which was that a value program option that compensate customers inequitably for local renewable. You said that for people who have lower energy production, who don't fall under, how many tiers do we have? 2 or 3? 3. That's what I thought. So if you're just in tier 1, you get compensated at a lower rate for this, is what you were saying.
Mm-hmm.
And so therefore, what this would imply is that we compensate people in tier 1 for more than what they're paying out on tier 1. I'm not okay with that. Because then actually they're making money on it as opposed to offsetting. So if you're just in tier 1 and you spend $100 a month and you go ahead and you install this, you then get $150 back to offset that. The fact that in tier 3 you would be spending more money. You following?
I think I am.
I'm not sure what number 1 gets us, other than the notion that we're going to subsidize people more in tier 1 because people in tier 3 get a better benefit.
Why do you assume that falls under the definition of fair and equitable?
Because that's what she said.
I think she said to equalize the playing field, you could create a fixed charge.
Okay, I didn't hear it that way. I didn't hear a fixed charge concept.
Yeah, she did raise the fixed charge.
That was earlier.
But that's sort of embedded in what's equitable, what's fair. Right. What do they get to avoid that green bar, which is the distribution? How do you ensure you recover those costs for running the distribution part of the system?
So I guess the question is if we just stuck with our regular COSA design guidelines. If we were just stuck with our regular COSA design guidelines, right? Why would it not work under that? What would be different? And I mean, I can see if we added and consider compensating solar producers at a rate equivalent to the value of solar to Palo Alto. That actually, though that is pretty nebulous and gives you the impression of that you can basically pay them anything you want. But I'm actually wondering what the rest of this gives us. Why we can't, in fact, I just don't understand why we just don't stick with our regular COSA design guidelines, why we don't just apply those.
Didn't the COSA guidelines get us into trouble with the energy efficient households? Tier rate design for residents.
No, I think the COSA proposes to look at that. The guidelines propose to look at some of that.
So if I could step in, I think what these design guidelines get us, well, first of all, the opportunity to go through the stakeholder process, not just here, but also prior at the UAC, which has been, is a valuable process in and of itself. But this provides more detail to direct staff's efforts on how we're going to be evaluating different rate design specifically for a NEM successor tariff program. So for instance, so for number 3, for instance, under the existing NEM, there is a really strong synergy between adopting solar PV and an electric vehicle. And there are, probably many reasons for that, but one of them is with tiered rates, especially in PG&E territory with steeply tiered rates, but even in Palo Alto. When you adopt an EV, your load increases, but of course if you install solar that's net metered, it will bring you back down. And so there's a synergy that exists between solar specifically and that demand side technology. And so this is, basically directing us or self-directing, or when they're adopted by council, directing us to consider what the implications would be for whatever NIM successor program proposal we might have for other demand side technologies.
So just to make sure I understand, what you're saying is, under the current COSA guidelines, we don't have the ability, frankly, to look at EVs and whether or not we should look at demand side, which basically means we charge the car at night. We pull power at night usually on most EVs, right? And we don't get a benefit of that, and the sun shines in the day. I mean, that's what I guess I'm not following exactly what you just meant.
Actually, can I try a different example, which
Sure.
is the one I thought of when I read that bullet 3, which is you go by Tesla's storage system, and you pull power at night, right, and sell it back in the daytime, which is why I asked about the time difference in days. And I didn't see that's not part of the COSA design wise, but that's in principle you can make money doing that, right?
Mm-hmm. Or if there's a demand charge, for instance.
Buy it at a low rate at night and sell it back at a high rate during the daytime.
But we couldn't do that under our current system. I can't go buy a Tesla storage, pull power at night, and sell it back to the utility at peak periods. Right? No one's going to allow me to do that right now, right?
I don't know. I mean, maybe.
Yeah, it does imply that.
Well, it doesn't.
It's probably
This
not
is about
cost
solar.
effective because.
But these are the NEM successor programs. This is only for the solar.
Or their equivalent.
Where does it say that?
Isn't that in the description? Other equivalent.
Other equipment. Yeah.
There are other technologies that would be eligible for net metering. We haven't had any requests in Palo Alto.
But you listed 4 or 5.
Yeah, there are other technologies.
So you're right. So then what we're saying is that are we saying that this would apply, that these additional guidelines would also apply to other possible technologies? Is that one of the things we're saying as a council, a group, or not?
Well, in practice, it's going to be solar PV.
Okay.
But
Right.
No,
So,
fair enough.
yeah.
So then we should think about it in terms of solar PV, if that's what we're talking about.
Well, number 3 says other demand side technologies.
Oh, I see what you mean. Sorry. So for that particular design guideline, right. And so
Yeah.
that's looking at concurrent adoption of adopting solar PV, but then also potentially a power wall from Tesla, or maybe a grid interactive load, or maybe just an EV, increasing your load from electrification.
So I understand what the intent of this is, and I don't have a problem with it. I mean, I could see there are technologies like EVs or Powerwall or something where that you may want to think about that when you design your rates. That's what that's saying, right? I guess I'm not clear what the impact though, why we need number one to do that. What we need, I'm not clear what we need in number one or what the effect of that is. I don't think that's been explained to me. Number two seems a little broad. So what number two basically does is it goes beyond and allows us to go beyond the avoided cost. That's really what it does.
It's meant not to tie your hands in case you want to do something that might not be just solely avoided. The things that you value, it might not be well defined today. We don't really have we have a way of valuing greenhouse gases that might not be part of what goes into the COSA. You might want to consider it for the NEM successor.
So what you're really saying is because
things like that.
This isn't about greenhouse gas. I always viewed this as the distribution cost, basically. That's the avoided cost. We don't have to distribute, and there may be some. Never quite bought the argument that a few extra megawatts make a big difference if the grid goes down. Okay, so what about the other ones? Assess the likely impact on the rate of solar adoption implications for meeting the local solar plan. Why do we need that in there? What does that achieve?
So I'm going to suggest my thinking on it, and Amy will also weigh in. The way you design rates, you could accelerate the interest in local solar, or you could decelerate the interest in local solar, and it's just sort of understanding that when you design your rates.
So again, you're talking about what you're talking about doing then is you're saying we could increase the subsidy.
Well, we're saying assess the likely impact on the rate.
That's really what we're saying. That's what number 2 does. That's what number 4 does.
So could I step in? So regarding design guideline number 1, so you'd ask the question, but because a low energy consumer, I mean, are we saying we're going to subsidize them, beyond the 9.3 or whatever the first tier is? And that's so you can think of our E1 tiered rates as completely separate from what this NIM successor program could be. So, like, for instance, one NIM successor option could be a fixed charge and a flat energy rate. And in that case, it doesn't matter if you consume 300 kilowatt hours a month, or it doesn't matter. Well, it doesn't matter if you're a very low energy consumer, a very high energy consumer, or there would be some impacts. I mean, there would be some sort of threshold, or if there's a particular minimum charge that with a flat energy rate, then it might not be as tied to what the on-site consumption is. You could formulate a rate that's not necessarily tied to consumption, is what I'm saying.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because I meant to ask this, right? Which is there anybody that does that? I mean, this is relatively new, but consider water, okay, where you're paying both the fixed cost of the infrastructure and a certain rate per liter you use. Is there anybody that divides up their municipal water bill like this and says, okay, here's your portion of the fixed cost, here's your variable cost for how much water you consume, and it's not dependent on volume? Is there anybody that does that?
Yes, our contract with San Francisco.
I mean,
No, that's volumetric. But that's certainly an option in designing rates. Whether somebody is that purist when they design their rates, I honestly, I don't know.
Do we know of any other? Are there any other cities? Do we know?
Yes, there used to be a bunch of cities that simply you pay a fixed charge every month. You can use as much water as you want, and then there was a big push on conservation to go towards volumetric rates. And so people went from where water was just a fee, where you just
water was free.
Water was free because it was the infrastructure that you divvied it up, to now volumetric rates. Purely,
and everybody howls about why is my water bill going up when I'm using less?
Right.
Yeah, we know that's the case because there are certain areas where they don't even have water meters, so they just recover their costs.
Exactly. So, and I think what happens is they pushed more volumetric rates to encourage consumption. That there's a tendency for councils then to go to 100% volumetric, and then because people argue when you try and put a fixed cost on it, well, that discourages people from conserving because you have a fixed charge. That's always the argument whenever I see a fixed charge. And I mean, I'd be fine with a fixed charge on some of this and at other to fairness, I'm just not sure that's the way I would see it going. I mean, maybe. I mean, I just want to make sure that, what we're tasked with today is to pass and say we support these. And they are nebulous. They are, and this is not necessarily a criticism, but they're very nebulous because you wanted to give maximum.
Greg, do you want to suggest some language that would capture what we're trying to get at?
Before you do that, can I sort of offer a counter opinion before we start making motions?
Sure.
Right, which is, I read this as, we're going to go off and we're going to see what the COSA analysis comes back, because there's stuff we don't know yet, right? Right. We're going to do that, and we're going to think about it, and we're going to try to come up with something that makes sense, right? And here's some of the things we're going to look at, right? And so it is kind of vague, right? Well, we're going to do value of solar itself, but we're going to define that loosely enough at this point that we got some latitude to do it. And whatever you come back, it's going to come back to us, and it's going to come back to council, and then we're going to argue about sort of whether it makes sense to us. So that was sort of my interpretation.
So-
This is like the question is, how prescriptive do we want to be today about this?
So that's a fair statement,
Right.
and that's when I'm thinking about language you asked. I guess I would basically just want to have the word consider. So it's, consider and evaluate program options, so that we're not basically saying you have to do all of these and meet these requirements.
That's good.
And that's really all I really
I don't
want.
think that's what you wanted anyway. That you didn't want anything that says we are going to do this and there's going to be a check mark on all these, right?
That's right.
Right, and I just want to make sure that later we basically don't say, someone doesn't come back and say, this program doesn't compensate customers fairly and equitably for the reason you said,
Right.
where it may make perfect sense and says, well, if you use more in tier 3, that's okay,
Right.
and therefore you pay the same. And we go to a fixed charge, maybe I'm probably fine with that. But what I'm probably not fine with, for instance, would be the notion that you spend $100 of electricity and you get a check back for $150
Right.
because you're in tier 1 and it's the same person in tier 3.
Right.
And I'm not saying we get there. And I'm sure, since I can think of that off the top of my head with very little thought, that I don't want to have all these unintended consequences.
Somebody's going to argue that anyway.
I know. So I just want, number one implies to me that we're committing to, compensate customers fairly and equitably for local renewable energy market, which is hard to argue with. I mean, obviously you want to do
So
that.
if you said consider program options instead of evaluate program options, is that good?
Yeah.
I thought
Well,
you
I
were-
want you want to consider and
Just
evaluate.
consider and evaluate.
Consider-
Right. Consider and evaluate.
Works for me.
And then, and then same, consider and evaluate the impact on the current, I mean, that's really all I want.
Eric, yeah, just in
I have another
contrast.
bombshell to drop here.
Well, in
Let's wait
contrast to
this
your
through.
last
The
bombshell.
bomb question, right?
What we vote tonight,
Right.
they're going to come back
Yeah.
with the details
Right.
in March.
Right.
But they're going to use this
I
to
understand.
arrive at the details.
I understand, but they're going to come back with something. Yeah. And then,
So if there's
but
something.
this gives them quite a
in
bit
there-
of latitude as it is, right?
Well, it does, yeah.
So the only thing I always get concerned about, you see, is you're right. It gives a huge amount of latitude, but then what happens is it goes back, and then people say, "Well, you voted for this,
Yes.
and this is what this means."
That's right.
I'm always like, "Really? That's what I voted for?"
Eric's going to say it's subjective.
It's subjective. Pat called me up last night, gave me a hard time about subjective. He'd rather use qualitative. Okay, I can use qualitative.
All right, we ready? Do you want?
Can I ask?
Well,
So-
if you're comfortable.
I have another
Go ahead.
question, right? This is a heresy question, right? I'm not asking for now, right? But the goal of
I'll come back
4%,
for the
4% local solar by 2023. Does that ever get reviewed? That is there some point in the future, not this year, but like we say, well, in 2020, we're going to take a look at that and see if it still makes sense? I mean, does that ever come up for review?
It comes up all the time, and all we ever want to say, "No, we want 10% now."
Yeah.
That's the way it goes.
It'll be bigger.
Yeah, so we're in the process of completing a solar potential assessment. So that includes the technical potential assessment, like the GIS-based analysis, but building on that, the economic and market potential. And that would give an indication of how reachable this 4% goal is. And based on the first cut, with the decision on PV partners that was made, and also with the current cap to net energy metering, we would be able to achieve that 4% goal.
I asked that the wrong way, okay? I'm not asking if the 4% is reachable. Because as we know, the technology for this and the market environments, the economics, it changes reasonably quickly, right? 2023 is a long time away, right? So do we ever sit down and evaluate, does it still make sense to target 4% local solar production, right? Or should the number be 3%, or should it be 5%, or should there be no number?
Mm-hmm.
Do we ever sit down and say, let's do a checkpoint and see if that makes sense? And it's too soon this year, right? But at some point.
Well, with the solar potential, we would be doing exactly that to see, how much sense that number makes, and then also with this particular design guideline 4, assess the likely impact. If it might be the case that upon reevaluating it at regular intervals, it may make sense to propose a change to it. But to answer your question, we do look at it and evaluate it.
And you care
reassess it.
About your question derives from caring about whether or not we're subsidizing or overpaying for this sort of thing.
Well, let me be a little broader than that. Is that goal, is the primary justification for some other programs that we do, right? And so you say, well, why are we doing this program? Well, because it reaches that goal. And so, look, we can't change our mind on strategy every week, right? So I'm just asking if it's at some point in time, do we sit down and do a checkpoint and say, does it still make sense to go this direction? And I'm not proposing that every time this comes up, and some of us disagreed with the scale of the feed-in tariff subsidy, right? I'm not proposing that it come back and every time it comes in front of this group, we try to kill it again, okay, right? I mean, we shouldn't do that. If the council voted, we should support it, right? But, 2023 is a long time.
We won't be around.
You will. I'm going to die young.
I'm saying we won't be sitting on the council then, unless Greg is going to return. But I don't mean you, Greg.
I thought you meant Greg Schmidt.
Okay.
So,
okay, that's my obnoxious question. Look at your motions now. Or I won't hold it.
Are we anywhere close to a decision?
Oh, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think we're ready.
So can I clarify that we, what I heard is your request that we reword at least design guidelines 1, 2, and 3 to consider and evaluate program options, consider and evaluate compensating solar participants, consider and evaluate the impact on the current adoption. Is that correct?
Yeah, and consider about, and I think on number 4 too.
And also number 4?
Yeah. And then I also want to make sure that these are subservient to our regular COSA guidelines, because that's what we said, right? Okay.
I guess I would like to see at least the first sentence of the first COSA as one of the guidelines.
Yes, I would too. I mean, I think the important one that I want to make sure that we get in here is guideline number 1.
Yeah.
That all of these are subservient to guideline number 1. I'd like to reiterate that.
And that would help us with Prop 26.
And then I also was flirting with this notion of that. So my concern in all of this is a level of rate increases for customers that are not using solar. That they're paying for.
They're not what?
The customers that don't have solar.
Right.
Is how much they're going to subsidize the other solar customers. And so in all of this, I would like to minimize that word practical. And I don't know if that's a design guideline. Design guideline, what that would say, something like the design guidelines shall consider the rate impact on non-solar customers, or minimize the rate impact on non-solar customers. Or, minimize may be too prescriptive, but I want it to be considered. Shall consider and evaluate.
Consider and evaluate.
Shall consider and evaluate the impact on non-solar customers. I think I'd like to add that as number 7.
But isn't that what we're exactly after?
What?
Well,
Is
not necess-
consider and evaluate the impact on, I mean, that's going to be the long-term issue.
Right.
Somebody is going to say, this wasn't fair. And so that's what you're really talking about, is how do you get to parity with this? Or we're going to hear from customers at some point.
Yeah, right now it talks about solar customers. What Greg wants to add is non-solar customers.
I mean, basically,
Yes,
the
no,
risk is
that's
it's
what I
going to
meant.
transfer the infrastructure costs onto the non-solar customers.
Yeah, no, I understand just what
So
you're saying.
you got that, consider and evaluate the impact on non-solar customers. So I would move the COSA guideline, the NEM guidelines, the successor NEM guidelines with those changes.
Okay, there are 2 changes. One is the insertion of the first COSA, and then the second one is the consider and evaluate impact on non-solar.
And then there's the just wording of changes of consider and evaluate 1, 2, 3, and 4.
Yeah.
Throughout this, though, we're still looking at the 800 versus the 15,000, am I right? You're not going to be doing a lot of subsidizing, I don't think.
Well, the goal is to encourage more people to use. than
Well,
now.
I think that's a good idea, but I look at the 4 of us here, and none of us have solar, so
I'm changing that. I'm thinking we have a short window to get back in that. I'm calling. Who do I call tomorrow?
So you can be grandfathered then.
Well, there's a short window of opportunity here.
very short.
And you should probably call too, Liz.
As soon as I get those trees down, I'm going
Oh, that's
to.
right. You're community solar because you have the trees.
Chainsaw.
Okay, is that
Parking
a
czar to put it
proposal?
on your garage.
Yes. What'd you say?
You gotta call the parking czar to put it on your garage.
I will second. Do you want to speak to your proposal?
So yeah, I mean, overall, I think you guys did a good job. I'm glad we had this discussion, and I think with these changes, it'd be, good go forth and do it.
Okay, any further comments?
I think it's great.
No, but thank you for being so patient with all of our
Very good.
questions.
You're putting up with us.
Yes. I appreciate it.
Okay, then just to be clear, what we're doing is we're adding 2 new elements, a 7 and an 8. 7 would read the rates must be based on the cost to serve customers.
You want that one?
Say it again. Just let Greg go through it.
The COSA.
The
That's
first
the COSA one.
new one is, the first of COSA, which says rates must be based on the cost to serve customers. We're adding an 8, which is consider and evaluate the impact on non-solar customers. And then we're adding on the existing 1, 2, 3, 4, consider and evaluate.
Right. That's good.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. That passes unanimously. So it was a very enlightening discussion. Thanks very much. Very helpful.
Look for a call from Greg tomorrow. The Greg with the blue shirt on.
But I still don't know who to call.
You don't know who to call?
Because the marketing and communication of program to customers has not been outreach.
I'll bet you could find someone who's willing to put
It's
your
probably
solar.
in my utility bill somewhere.
Well, I just realized I could put it on we could put it on our garage roof. I hadn't thought about that.
Vice Mayor Schmidt, I just wanted to take the moment to thank Val for her years of support to the Finance Committee since this
Oh, you might not
the-
be.
Is this
the
it?
last one.
You're not back on the
Oh, is this your last one?
Last Finance Committee.
Oh,
Well, I don't think I
Val.
have any items on the thing.
You don't?
Well, I do, maybe. on it.
Well, not at the
Are you
Finance.
going to come back?
I don't know. Well, I don't have to.
And I think that's policy.
That's policy.
answer.
Oh, okay, this might be it for me.
Yeah.
Oh,
You're not
we
gonna-
would have had
you're
a
not
cake
gonna-
anyway.
You're not going to come back and visit us every Tuesday next year?
Oh, sure. In spirit, yeah.
It's an easy commute, Val.
Yeah.
What is the commute time for you? I
Well,
know it's the time of day, but
Yeah, it is entirely. But it can be 2 hours each way. Yeah, it's not
Where-
that many miles. It's just like
Where do you live now?
in the East Bay. Yeah.
How far?
It's about close to 50 miles from me. Yeah. Close
yeah,
to
that's a
50.
long.
That's a lot
It's
of
just,
time.
it's a slog.
Yeah,
That's a
that's
lot
a
of
good
time.
way to put it. It's a slog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a lot of time.
Thanks, Val.
Well,
Thank
thanks
you.
for
Thank you, Val.
everything. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So, what do we have left to do?
Thanks, Andy.
I want to go home and just cough for a while.
Okay, we just want to look at future agendas.
We have one meeting left, and that's the 15th of this month, and we have 5 items on the agenda. So let me go through them really quick. 3 of them are on your agenda already, so I will not repeat them in long detail. The long-range financial forecast, first quarter of 16, and the recycling and compost items. The 2 other items that we have is the item that we moved earlier this evening for the library bond oversight.
Right.
And the 5th item, we promised you that we would do a summary update of all the open items listed above. And so we're going to provide to you a staff report with some summary updates and some target dates on when they would be completed. And so we could have a discussion at the end of that meeting.
Great.
Okay? And that's all we have.
We'll lay in some food and wine for that.
Yes.
Yeah, who's bringing the goodies?
I think it should be all the men.
I agree with you.
It's such a nice
Yeah,
change.
totally right.
I agree with you. It should all be all the men.
But you can do a sign-up sheet.
That's all we had.
Okay. Any
All right,
further
thank you.
comments?
There's so many more of us, we'll bring more food.
The meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Excellent.
But whatever we bring, you have to eat.
That's scary. That is scary. That is scary.
Have a good night.
Well, he didn't say I was going to cook.
So early.
Well, compared
Well,
to...
this isn't policy and services.
So,
We're starting
Have a
getting
good
that. We
night.
are kind of getting that way.